the future will be the Asian consumer. The Asian consumer will be the reference point in the future. And what that means is the following. When you think of the 20th century, especially the second half of the 20th century, I think every marketer really used the US consumer as a reference point. You need to make it with the US consumer. If you get the US consumer, then you can take your products. You can take your campaigns. You can take your image into other markets. That was the common understanding for the last 50 years. Because it's a huge, huge market. Not only that, it's a very advanced market. It is very, very much a consumer society. But the idea is that this may be changing. That this may be changing, perhaps not in 5 years, maybe not in 10 years yet, but certainly in 15, 20 years. And then when we're reaching the middle of this century, by 2050, when China will be the largest economy, double, maybe triple that of the United States. When India and Indonesia will also have a really, really big middle class and will no longer be considered emerging markets, when you also will have a sizable consumer market there, that then very, very much the campaigning, the marketing, the product development that we will be doing needs to be done perhaps first for Asian consumers, and then will be from there taken to the rest of the world. That's the idea here. I'm putting this up sort of as a hypothesis rather than as a fact, but frankly speaking, there are also several data points that speak in that direction that I will be sharing with you in a moment. Shanghai is a world-class city, constantly improving its infrastructure. Shanghai is a place where many luxury goods makers nowadays create the latest flagship stores and launch some of their products before they do it in New York or London or Milan or Paris. You have the fast-speed train that goes from the airport to the city, which is the fastest land transportation in the world. So within a period of 20 years, in this particular city, Shanghai, and the same is true for other Chinese cities in particular, and for other Asian cities outside China too, you have seen an incredible change. So I do believe, based on these stories and based on the data that I'm going to show you, perhaps there is something to this notion of the Asian century, the century also of the Asian consumer. This is from the Economist Intelligence Unit. This is their prediction in terms of growth, 6.5%. This is, again, the East Asian region. We are talking about India, Indonesia, China, and then the Asian countries in between, all combined. That's their prediction. Ex-Japan, okay? And this is a huge figure. If you compare it, for example, to the predicted growth figures that you get for this country, which are around 1.5%. Europe is 0.2%, or in some predictions, not by the Economist, but otherwise even negative. It is double the figure that you have for Latin America. The only part of the world that exceeds this are certain markets, certain pockets in Africa. If you are a major multinational company, your focus needs to be increasingly in Asia, because that is the growth region. Now, who should your target be there? Well, if you're a major international consumer goods company, your target is usually the middle class. And there's very, very good news, because that middle class is growing. Look at these figures here put together by a financial group in Singapore. Look at the top right there. You have, year 2009, 28% of the world middle class is located in Asia. Now, that figure is predicted by 2020 to be 54%. So the majority of middle class consumers, when this decade is out, will be in Asia. So it makes it very easy, in a way, in 5 to 10 years for consumer goods companies, because they are products. When you're thinking about toothpaste, when you think about cleaning products, when you're thinking about daily household food items, they are for people that are being pulled out of poverty and are entering the middle class. And the middle class, in that sense, is not just an income phenomenon, it is also a consumption phenomenon, because the middle class wants exactly those kinds of products. And they want it on a massive scale. And they want to have brands. And that's the good news, and that's what the consumer goods companies are banking on. Second thing, you need to have a customer focus. You need to have strategies that are focused on customers in order to compete and succeed. Why do you need this? Because, well, if you're just product focused, maybe your products don't work in particular markets. You need to take into account, you need to at least examine, based on data, based on information, based on insight, whether you can use the same products, whether you can use the same communications, the same approaches. So it needs to start with customer insight. From that, you need to develop your strategies, and that will guarantee the growth. The third point, the third lesson is that you need to understand Asian consumers. You need to understand the similarities as well as the differences. This is a very, very diverse region. It is by far not as homogeneous as the United States. And not only in terms of the income differences that you still find in China alone between the coastal provinces and the inward land, for example, but also in terms of the traditions, in terms of the cultural backgrounds, in terms of the infrastructure. There's lots and lots of diversity. So the question is, can we really talk about an Asian consumer, or should we talk about lots and lots of different Asian consumers? For example, Chinese consumers are different from Indian consumers, are different from Indonesian consumers, or even within China, the coastal province consumers are very different from the inland consumers. The north is different from the south, and so on. Well, one rule that we've learned over the last 20, 30 years of academic research primarily is this idea that Asians are collectivists rather than individualists. So they are very, very different from Americans. In fact, Asians are at the other extreme when you look at lots and lots of studies compared to Americans. In America, as you know, we're all individualists. We all believe in ourselves. We believe that we have certain rights, certain independence. Somebody is considered confident if they are forcing their own opinion onto others, if they are powerful, if they are leaders. In Asia, and this was first proposed by a Dutch scientist called Gerd Hofstadter, the idea is a little bit different. Asians are more tied to social networks. They are bound into social networks. They show loyalty towards those social networks. They are collectivists. In terms of their own self, it is more interdependent rather than independent. Now, what does this mean for marketing to Asian consumers? Well, it suggests, first of all, that you shouldn't just market to individuals, you have to market to entire groups, entire networks. So I think David's idea of customer networks would be extremely relevant for Asia and should be more powerful in Asia because it is all about the communities that you want to reach and not the individuals. It also suggests that if you're successful with one product, well, that would spread because you spread it among your friends. There's more uniformity in terms of consumption behaviors. And indeed, there are lots and lots of studies that have shown those sorts of findings. But I think there are also some open questions. For example, when you're orienting yourself towards others, who exactly are you orienting yourself to? Who exactly is influencing you? Who exactly is that collective that will be determining your attitudes, your goals, your shopping behaviors? Is it the family? Is it the friends? Is it the youth culture? Is it a nation? And indeed, it probably differs from market to market. It's been found in some research that Indians are much more oriented towards the family. Whereas, for example, when you go to Koreans or Japanese, the more developed markets in Asia, there you're getting a lot of influence from the peer culture. And I guess we haven't talked much about North Korea, although it was mentioned this morning already, right? But in North Korea, the reference point may be very, very much the nation. And how about China? Well, in China, you have an interesting phenomenon, which is the one-child policy, which has been now intact for a few decades. So as a parent, you have the right to have only one child. As a result, these children in China, the general research findings are pretty spoiled. They're referred to as the young emperors that are being splashed by their parents. Now think about that kind of child or youth becoming a 30, 40, 50-year-old consumer. There's research data that suggests that Chinese are actually becoming extremely individualist because they've been getting all the attention on themselves. So they believe in themselves. They're becoming as confident and as much into, I know what I want, as we typically find for Americans. So keep that sort of idea in mind of collectivism, but also treat it with a grain of salt, because there are research emerging now that says, well, actually, we have to look a little bit deeper. We have to look country by country. You have to look at the differences as well. And Perhaps in certain countries it is even flipping around so that we get individualist consumers. Number 2, Asians value traditions. This is what we are talking about, right? For example, wellness, massages. They all have these long, long traditions, whether it's Bali massage or whether it's Ayurveda in India or whether it is Chinese medicine and Chinese massage. They value those things. So as a result, we can, and that's been done with Banyan Tree, for example, a chain in Asia, we can build the concept of Asian spas where we do these treatments. Or think about another tradition, noodle soup, very, very Asian. You find it in every single country, you find a noodle soup. And indeed, there is a very, very successful business being built in China right now, a $1 billion business where you just sell instant noodle soup. Fantastic. But actually, we could also look at the details again. The instant noodle soup company here in China has actually a huge variety of different noodle soups. There is no one Asian noodle soup, one Asian noodle soup tradition. There's a Chinese one, there's a spicy one, there's a Sichuan one, there's one for northern China, and so on. The same for the massage techniques. And then there's, of course, the fact that in addition to all of these traditions, all of these religions, all of these traditional things, a lot of Asians are also very, very much future-oriented. In fact, if you think about what we normally mean by culture, we mean by culture certain languages that are spoken, certain religious traditions. We are talking about dress codes. We are talking about the physical infrastructure. That's what we normally mean by culture. A lot of this is disappearing. The Asian landscape looks like modern cities. Everybody speaks pretty much English, at least in business situations. In China nowadays, according to the new government policy, you learn English at the age of 5. Right? In terms of dress codes, well, you rarely see somebody wearing a traditional dress. Maybe sometimes at certain holidays in Japan, somebody may still be wearing a traditional Japanese dress. Or on Singapore Airlines, as a marketing tool, you get a sarong. But normally people wear Western clothing. So in a way, these culture things may be disappearing. I'd like to give you another one. Asians love brands. That's certainly true. Louis Vuitton, you know. In Paris, more than 50% of the customers are Asians. Louis Vuitton puts up these flashy flagship stores all over Asia. This is the Glass Pavilion in Singapore. We did a conference recently in Singapore where we had a luxury panel. Everybody was talking about brands is the major thing, especially in the luxury business. But at the same time, Asians are also unbelievably value-focused. Much, much more than in this country. For everything, you need to get some deal. You need to get some value points. You need to get a discount. You need to get a lucky draw. So when you take this rule too, again, you have to take it sort of with a grain of salt. It's not clear that these rules that we've established over the last 5-10 years about Asian consumers are really true. There's lots and lots of detail that we have to look at and do research on. 2 more things. Asian women are fashionistas, right? They're crazy for the latest fashions. They're being done in the major cities. Everybody imitates them. For the men, they're all techies, right? They walk around with their mobile phones. And when you go to the tech environments, that's what it looks like. It's everywhere and that sort of thing. Again, some of this may be stereotypes from the past. So my point is, the understanding of Asian consumers nowadays has to be very, very detailed. It has to go market by market. We can't just generally assume they are all the same, they're all collectivists, they all have this traditional view. They all believe in brands. And if we just come out with our right brand, with the right image, we are fine. No. Some of the Asian consumers are extremely individualist. Some of them are very future-oriented, are into the latest technologies, wanting the latest. And in terms of brands, they also want a deal. So what does this mean for, can you pursue a pan-Asian strategy? Well, it may be tough. You may need to look market by market. Of course, there are some broad-based similarities, but there are also lots and lots of differences. Should you use an Asian, a Western, or a global image? It probably, again, differs. For certain kinds of product categories, like food items, an Asian image is very, very important. To show localization is critical. For others, for example, luxury goods items, right now, it's very much a Western image. And for some brands, you want a global image, like technology products. And finally, for emerging markets, the ones in Asia, can you apply principles from developed markets? Well, maybe to a certain degree, in terms of watching what happens when somebody gets pulled out of poverty and enters first the middle class. There are certain commonalities in terms of the product categories that you want, but probably in terms of the brands that you want nowadays in a global environment, you also have to look much, much more into detail. So the consensus at a recent conference that we ran in Singapore, where we invited lots and lots of leaders from the Asia region, also from international companies, was you probably have to localize to a large degree. And that requires that we get a detailed understanding of Asian consumers, which we currently lack. There have been lots and lots of East-West comparisons, but not a detailed look and a comparative view of Indians versus Chinese versus Indonesians, as well as all the other Asian countries. I think this is a major research task for academics, for market research firms as well, because the century will very likely be the century of the Asian consumer. Thank you.